Hello, everyone. Forest Focus as we reach the midway point in a pivotal week for Nottingham Forest. Which European competition will the Reds end up in? And then what happens with the players and even the manager? We'll discuss that and a little bit more in the company of, first of all, the Daily Mail's Midlands football writer, Tom Collomosse. Tom, good to have you back with us. How are you today?
I'm really well, thanks, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Yes, good to have you back, as I say. Lots to get into. I introduce our second guest, the iPaper's chief football writer and a Red supporter in Daniel Storey. Morning, mate. How are you?
Morning, Matt. All well, you?
Yeah, I'm not nervous at all yet. I think I will be when I'm walking into the ground, but feeling good so far. We'll get into that. It's interesting. We say walking into the ground. You're actually going to walk into the ground on Sunday, I think, aren't you? After the end of the 92 that you've been doing, Dan. How's that feel?
Yeah, there's like two levels of emotion and nerves and pressure. I'm kind of glad that there's something riding on the game because I can sort of at least ignore that element of it. But yeah, I'm at Wembley for the Championship playoff final on Saturday, and then Sunday we'll walk to Forest Ground, which is, as you say, the 92nd I'll have done. And yeah, I mean, no place I'd rather end up. It was the one that was written in pen at the start of the season. I was always going to, as soon as I saw we had a home game, last game of the season, I didn't want anything to be riding on it. Now I'm glad there is.
How's the whole experience been? Because 92 grounds or 92 different clubs in one season's pretty mad. How have you found it overall?
Yeah, it's been everything I wanted it to be. I wanted to do this not just to go to the games, but to write about all 92 clubs. I think there are a percentage of clubs within that who feel like their club is basically ignored by national media until they draw a big club in the FA Cup or they go into financial emergency. And for a while, I think that was probably Forest. The story was always Forest would draw a big team in the FA Cup when they were a lower end championship, and it would be like, oh, Forest, you remember Forest in the good old days. And it's like, it does feel a little bit patronising for some of those clubs. So I wanted to kind of give them the treatment. It's been the best season of my life. I'm hoping that Sunday will be the best day of the season.
One more, but before I go, it's Tom and Sunday. If people haven't read all 92, and if they have all 91, then very well done to them. If you were to tip people towards 2 or 3 clubs off the beaten track that might be of interest, who would you say?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed doing the one at Harrogate early in the season where I shadowed manager Simon Weaver and sat on the bench next to him during the game to kind of experience what a manager goes through on match day from morning to midnight. We've done some work pieces on the work that clubs do in the community. One of the ideas of the project was that we wouldn't just, football isn't just Saturday 3 p.m. or Sunday 4 p.m. this weekend. It is Monday mornings and Tuesday afternoons. So we did a piece with Notts County on the work they do with people going through cancer journey and linking people up so they can, have social interaction and some exercise. Those are the ones that kind of punch you in the gut because you don't really. It's easy to forget that stuff happens when you get obsessed just by a match day, I think.
Yeah, massively. Nicely done. You've led us into a little plug for it. If you haven't heard Monday's podcast with Harrogate keeper James Belshaw as the analyst, check it out. It's really interesting. He's really good on breaking down goals and stuff like that in ways that I hadn't seen. Even that first goal, which was just a pass out to Morgan. So, yeah, do check that out. Looking at Sunday then, Tom, from a neutral point of view, I guess, obviously I'm sure you would want Forest to do well, but from a more neutral point of view, how are you seeing it? How are you viewing that game and Forest chances, I guess, going into it?
I'm cautiously optimistic about it, actually, because I think that Forest's style of play is perfect for a team like Chelsea. Like if it were tennis or boxing, it'd be a good matchup because of that. I think where they struggled in the home games against Brentford and Everton is because Forest don't want to have the ball. They want you to have the ball. And Chelsea, this kind of sub-Pep Guardiola idea that Enzo Maresca has. I've got my views on Enzo Maresca, but anyway, they just want possession all the time. And I think that's perfect for Forest. I think, especially if Hudson-Odoi's back, they can really hurt Chelsea on the break. I was actually really encouraged by what I saw. Obviously, it was only on TV, but what I saw of the West Ham performance, because I did think after that Leicester game that, it might have been a real a real kind of kick in the teeth for them, and there might have been a sort of finality to it in terms of their European prospects. But the fact they could go and win at West Ham, I think that should rejuvenate everybody. Whether it'll be enough for the Champions League, I don't know, because they're relying on other results elsewhere. But I'd be surprised if they lose the game, put it that way.
Are you not sold on Maresca then?
Well, I just think that he's been pretty lucky with the way his career's progressed. If he was at Parma, it didn't work out there. Then he went to Leicester last season, which I think you'd give pretty much any coach in the EFL that job last year. And I think they would have got Leicester up. That was one of the best squads the Championship's ever had. He nearly messed it up. People forget that. I think they would have ended up in the playoffs hadn't Ipswich and Leeds wobbled at exactly the same time. And I think he was lucky to get the Chelsea job off the back of it. I think Pochettino ended the season really well there, and Maresca kind of rode the wave in the early part of the season before, deciding he has to impose this, rigid Guardiola-esque style without the tweaks that Guardiola's able to make to his own style. So I think, he might prove me wrong. He now go and win 10 Champions Leagues in the next 10 years, but I think he's lucky to be where he is based on what he's achieved.
I've got the fixtures, the other teams. We'll have a look at them, but just focusing on Forest and Chelsea in this game, Dan, how are you rating our chances of winning? Because it's the psychology of that we have to win. I think it changes things, does it?
I'm actually happier that we have to win. If we'd have only needed a draw or to have something guaranteed, I think that would have been a really weird psychological position for Forest, particularly with the style of play that is used to sitting back and soaking up pressure. Trying to do that for 90 minutes, like it's worked because we've shifted things to that position. I'm not sure it works if you start in that position. We've seen twice against Manchester City in different competitions this season what happens if it ends in an early goal against you. It leaves you in a position where you're not quite sure where the second gear is. So I'm happy that we have to try and win. I don't think we'll go any different to how we normally do, but as Tom says, there's attacking depth there in wide areas. If Hudson-Odoi's back, the interesting question is whether he goes with just Elanga and then saves Hudson-Odoi to see what the scoreline is with 35 minutes left, maybe even at half time, and decides if it's a kind of two-phase game or whether he'd like to start them both and then kind of get ahead and then react. Because we've seen in recent weeks that there's not an awful lot else on the bench now. Jota seems to have slightly slipped from favour since the Everton game, I think. Ramon Sosa is a kind of, I don't know his persona non grata, but he's not really getting minutes. And Ty was obviously not going to be there. So it might be useful to have something in reserve. I'm kind of fascinated to see how Nuno sees the game playing out. But we've got a chance. We drew with Chelsea away. We were as good as them. We can beat them. They have got a final 3 days later, albeit not in their priority competition, given they can get in the Champions League. But we have got a shot. My gut feeling is that even if we win, I think the other results are not favourable for us. Let's be blunt. Villa have got the game everyone wants with Man U playing a final the night we record. And I watched Everton at Goodison and I saw what they were like after the final whistle last weekend, and they just looked like their season had ended. And you can understand that, saying goodbye to Goodison. So Newcastle have them. I just think that's the biggest sticking point for me rather than Forest Chelsea.
Yeah, and I agree about Hudson-Odoi. I suspect he'll keep him in reserve. I think that's Nuno's modus operandi in a way to be conservative and go for that. Let's just look at these other fixtures quickly then. Thanks to John Paul again for sending this graphic in. Appreciate it. As mentioned, Newcastle are at home to Everton, Chelsea v Forest. Villa go to Man U. Man City are at Fulham, almost out of the picture now after last night, and Forest are home to Chelsea. Just on Everton, Tom, can you make any case? I saw Palace play last night after an FA Cup and play very well, but was that because it was at home and this game's at Goodison, St James's Park for Newcastle? Is that too much of a factor, do you think?
I agree with Dan, actually. I think the only way Everton will end up coming into this game is if Newcastle play badly, they start badly, and then Everton could grow into the game. probably, I think Everton have largely lost interest in the season now because they've just finished at Goodison. That was the big day, exactly what Dan says. If Newcastle get jumpy, though, who knows? We've all seen games where a team appears to be on the beach, but then the opposition don't do it. And then the natural competitiveness of a professional athlete will come into play. I'd be more optimistic if I were a Forest fan about the Man United Villa game, although I have been saying this about Man United for about the last 2 months. That surely they won't just chuck in another league game and then they go and chuck in another league game. But Villa's record at Old Trafford is really poor. They won there under Dean Smith. That was actually his last win, oddly, as Villa manager in 2021. But either side of that, the record is appalling. And I just think with it being the last game of the season at Old Trafford, whether they've won this final or not, maybe it's naive of me, I don't know, but it's been such a bad season for them that surely they're going to want to end on some kind of an optimistic note. So I can't see them just chucking it in. And, Villa are edgy. I think that their record's been brilliant recently, really, really impressive. But it's so important to them financially, I think, for PSR reasons that they get the Champions League just to keep building in the way that they have been. And so there's so much riding on it for them. That would be the one I would look at, I think, if I were a Forest fan, rather than the Newcastle Everton game. I do just think it's a home win.
I think so too. The only Everton case I can make is more around if it's 0-0 or Everton sneak an early goal. But if it's 0-0 after an hour, Isak maybe doesn't play. Wilson's got to come off because he can't last. And I saw the end of the Arsenal game. They ended up looking really toothless. I think they took all their forwards off because they were all knackered and they didn't look like scoring. So maybe, but I agree about United. As you say, Dan, we're recording this before the game. It'll come out before the game anyway. Does it matter if United win or lose that final? Does it put any different slant on it or not?
Yeah, I was talking about this with mates last night. I don't know, and I've overanalyzed it and overthought it a huge amount. In our heads, we'd rather United lost because then they would feel like they had to produce something as a kind of apology on the final day of the season. Amorim would demand that, given he would be under more pressure. And if they won it playing late on a Wednesday night in Spain, you're probably not going to get back. There's going to be parties. Are their minds going to be focused on the game in 4 days' time? That was our theory. But Tom's right. There's also there's a confidence in winning that means that you could completely make the case that way round. The whole psychology of Sunday mid-game is going to be extraordinary because, we know that we've had 2 seasons where towards the end of the season, there's been a game where Forest need to get something. And if we win this, X happens, we stay in the Premier League. This is the first time that we're going to be focusing on results around us, which is kind of really weird for me. And also there's this odd psychology whereby if Villa and Newcastle are winning, then a draw is a good result for Forest as well, because we can still get in the Europa League if Chelsea then win the Conference League final. So this is like weird dynamic shifts. I hope that Forest make none of that matter and obviously do their own business, and that's exactly what Nuno will be saying. But yeah, it's the first time we've really had the kind of the radios and the live score apps out on our phones looking at results from other grounds. It's always been kind of done by us in the last few years.
Yeah, there's no way you're getting scores on your phones in the City ground with the Wi-Fi, unless you're on the Wi-Fi.
It reminds me of the last time we did it, I think, was that awful night against Stoke, wasn't it? That's the last time I remember being at the City ground and seeing, looking for results elsewhere or waiting on results elsewhere while keeping an eye on Forest results, which was obviously a horrible, haunting night. So less of that, please.
Certainly. We'll talk about which European competition and what it means and all that in 1 second. Just pull out a word for the Trent Navigation end of season party, and I'm sure it should be a party, no matter what. Free entry after the game at the Nav with the Fun Boy too. As ever, 80s and 90s club classics, bangers, anthems, and floor fillers, and you get some food there as well to help you sober up, hopefully. But it should be a good day, no matter what. If though, Tom, we end up in the Conference League or the Europa League. I think the owner might be potentially view it as a failure. I don't know, but how would you view the season? Some fans would be pretty annoyed that we didn't make the Champions League. Have they got a right to be or not?
It's a really difficult question because I'm not a Forest fan, so it's hard for me to say, how a fan should think or feel. So I just say it from my own position. It's two-way street, because if at the start of the season someone says, okay, Forest having finished 17th last season, previous season only dodged it by the skin of their teeth as well, they're going to finish 6th or 7th. It's remarkable, by any measure. The Michael Temple was saying on your podcast the other day that they've doubled their points total. The rate of improvement has been spectacular. However, if you get into a position where you got 3 home games with most of your players fit against Everton, Brentford and Leicester. I've seen a fair bit of Leicester this season. It's just been absolutely horrendous. And you're only getting 1 point from those games. Yeah, I do think, people are entitled to question what might have been. I could understand if they were in the position they were in, then they have those 3 home games against, I don't know, Newcastle, Man City and Villa, and they only get 1 point from those, and you can think, okay, but it was a tough run of fixtures. I think when you have them against sides that you've been clear of in the table, especially in the case of Everton and Leicester through the season, and you perform so limply, especially as they did against Everton and Brentford, I do think there's a case for feeling disappointed, because, in all likelihood, they might not be in this position again for a couple more seasons, given the wealth among the elite everywhere else.
How do you see? It's probably the same topic. You are a Forest fan, Dan. So how are you seeing it?
Yeah, I'm always eternally perceived as like a negative Forest fan, which is in 99% of cases absolutely fair cop. But I don't know if it's because I've not been to games this season, but I'm the opposite. I'm absolutely fine with it. Like if Forest had finished, like, the dynamics of a season play into fan psychology. Clearly, if we'd have been 10th for most of the season and then had an incredible run and still had a shot of Champions League now, then there would only be one mindset amongst everybody. It would be like, this is incredible, how have we done it? And I am still thinking, this is incredible, how have we done it? We've taken, if you focus on those results, and Tom's absolutely right, 1 point from those 3 games wasn't good enough. But Forest have got 33 away points this season, second only to Liverpool, with a goal difference away from home of +2. Let's be honest, like, there have been times when we've ridden our luck. We know that the kind of grinding out results has been successful, but it hasn't in recent weeks. We've looked nervy at the end of games. And that, to me, puts into focus that we didn't do so for nearly half a season, and we just looked supreme with a 1-0 lead. So, no, I'm kind of still, oh my God, Forest are going to qualify for Europe for the first time since I was 9 years old. And that is all that matters to me. The only caveat to that is the Conference League qualification. And I would like to be in as a competition, because I think we can have a good shot at going really deep and possibly even winning it, which would be incredible. The only fly in that ointment is that you don't go straight into the group stage. You have a qualifier in August. And that, Chelsea beat Servette 3-2 in that qualifier last August as a seeded team, and they looked really raw early pre-season. And I know they had a new manager, but the last thing we all want is Forest to celebrate getting in Europe for the first time in 30 years, and then you're out of it by the end of August. And that's what's kind of living rent-free at the back of my head, that qualifier in August. If it wasn't for that, I would be fine with anything. Obviously, I'd prefer to be in the Champions League, but I'd be fine with anything, because it all feels like I can still remember being like a point ahead of Luton, who had a game in hand, and we just had a points deduction, because it was literally a year ago. So we have to look at how far we've come in a short period of time.
I was just looking at previous Premier League tables while you chaps were talking. If we win, we'll get 68 points, which would have been enough for Champions League football last season. The season before, Brighton finished 6th on 62. Liverpool got 67 and finished 5th. It took 71 to get Champions League. So there's different ways of looking at it. But I suppose the other factor that has emerged of late, Tom, is just the form of the other teams. Like Villa's been ridiculous. Newcastle's been crazy. City's been crazy, and obviously I know top clubs do that, but it does feel like everything's gone against Forest at the moment. They've fallen off, doesn't it?
It does, and Villa made those moves in January, which I must say I wasn't sold on at the time, especially Asensio and Rashford, but the results proved me wrong. They've, in the league, since they were beaten at Palace 4-1, the only time they've dropped points since then was when they lost at Man City 2-1 in stoppage time. Like you say, Newcastle have been spectacular as well. There was the little wobble, understandably, when Eddie Howe wasn't there. Man City, you always expected to come back, really, didn't you? Just I know Guardiola's moaned about the size of his squad after they beat Bournemouth, but just the number of options they have, the number of class players, it's like that critical mass is gonna make itself felt in the end. So yeah, look, I wasn't trying to be negative Norris about it. I think it has been a brilliant season by any measure, but just those 3 home games, if you just get one, you win one of them, you're probably okay. Get 2 draws, you might even be okay. The Everton one, I think, sticks, doesn't it? That they had that late corner, it's 0-0, there's a break, Everton score. On such little moments do we always wonder about seasons, but yeah, there's no doubt it's been a brilliant season by any measure.
Did they make a mistake not signing anyone in January? I've got a view on this, but did they make a mistake or not?
I think it's fairly clear that Nuno was happy with the squad he had, and I think at that point, Nuno was king, and what he wanted, the mood he'd developed within the squad, the mood amongst the fan base behind him, the away results, where we were in the table, justified backing whatever Nuno wanted. And we're dealing with intangibles here, of course. We all said if Chris Wood gets an injury and if Tyro gets an injury between now and May, then we'll be saying we should have signed a striker. And they did both get injured for a period of time. And we looked like we should have signed a striker. But we also don't know what the dynamics of that would have been. If we had signed a striker, would it have been a cheap option? Would it have been someone who expected to start instead of Chris Wood? Would that have had to necessitate? Yeah, would that have had to necessitate thoughts about a change of shape? Tom is right to mention Ayew. Forest have repeatedly over the years in January tried to do something and it not particularly worked out. Gio Reyna, all those sorts. We've tried that, and it's really hard when you've got a close-knit squad, which at that point felt to me almost, if not more, strong in terms of mentality than the one that went up under Steve Cooper. If you then change that, it's really, you're taking a risk in itself. And either way, the only way that people weren't going to argue about this was if Forest qualified for the Champions League. That was the only way that anyone would make peace with it, because it's a complete unknown. And look, that's the point of podcasts like these. We like to discuss things. That's what makes it amazing. So my honest answer to a long-winded point is I've got no idea. But at the time, I was happy with it. I can't say I wasn't, because I just wanted Nuno to get what he wanted, because that felt more important than us kind of getting carried away and feeling like we needed to invest in a squad that looked really good at the time.
I think there's a couple of points to make on this, if I might, actually. Firstly, is when people talk about, should we have signed someone in January? The options aren't that great in January. All right, City did Omar Marmoush, didn't they? And generally, though, that level of player isn't available mid-season because the parent club, the club don't want to let him go. They'd get, they get a full season out of them, and they're trying to get their own objectives as well. So you do end up with an Andre Ayew or a Gio Reyna usually. The other one is on Nuno. There's almost like a spiritual side to Nuno, I would say, where he kind of believes in this collective energy and the group and everything. And he genuinely thought, I think, that anybody coming in, it could have been peak Maradona or something, would disrupt that kind of balance of energy that he'd established. He was like it at Wolves as well. He kind of has his gang of, 13, 14, 15 players. And he manages to kind of create this, or he believes that this is this kind of impregnable spirit, and anything that changes it will be a negative factor. And so I can completely understand why they didn't do it, especially given the options that were probably on the table.
I think I'm of the same view. And I in January, I thought I was on board with it. And if I change my opinion, it's because of outcomes, not process. And I think the process made sense of not signing people for the reasons Dan outlined. Also PSR, like we're in a good place now, but if we pump money in January for a player, as Tom said, you're overpaying, then it probably might have backfired. And we're in a great place for the summer now. So I was on board with it, and I think I have to be.
We also like imagine us in recruitment deals. Effectively, we were going out into the market and we were saying to agents of players, does your client want to come and be back up to Chris Wood for 5 months because he's in the form of his life and nobody can envisage dropping him if he's fit? So does your client want to come and sit behind a 33-year-old striker having a glorious Indian summer? And if he gets injured, your mate will start. Like that's a really hard thing to sell to people and to then attract motivated players. And I'm not saying we couldn't have, like Tom's right, we could have attracted someone, definitely, but Forest have been really, really good at signing players for the sake of it over the last 5 years. I honestly believe that this season was made last summer when Nuno got what he wanted in terms of squad size, in terms of transfer targets, in terms of key positions and improving what he has. And that's exactly what's happened. Our best performers this season, Milenkovic aside, and probably Elliot Anderson, are those who were already there because they had a full summer. So, yeah, I was on board with it then, and I still am now.
Let's talk more about Nuno then. Dan said Nuno was king. He's obviously very popular. There's been links for about 2 weeks or so now of mentioning Saudi Arabia that we've not commented on here. Linked yesterday with Roma. Lots of managers have been linked to that Roma job. But I think we will talk about it because there was a tweet from, I'm not sure I'm saying this right, Santi Una, who has got stuff, Forest right stuff in the past. So I remember he first said that Brice Samba was off. So I think it merits some discussion. Yesterday he reported that Nuno might go, citing in the translation, which I know I don't speak French, but in the translation he said internal tensions between Nuno and the owner were pointing towards that Nuno might go. What's your read on it all, Tom? It's a very wide open situation, and you know how there's always lots of different factors, lots of different camps in these things. But how are you seeing Nuno's situation in general?
I think first thing to say, Nuno's got 1 more year left on his contract, and when he would have joined Nottingham Forest, the salary that he's been given, then he's overperformed, I would suggest. And I remember when he was at Wolves, he ended up getting a pretty decent pay rise at the end of his second season. Sorry, at the end of their second season in the Premier League, when he'd taken them to a Europa League quarter-final. And at that time, there were links with other clubs as well. His agent is George Mendes, who is extremely prominent in the Saudi market. Nuno's got a record of success there, having delivered at Al Ittihad. So, look, I'm sure that George Mendes could move Nuno to the Saudi Pro League tomorrow if he wanted to. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I would just keep a close eye on that contract situation, though. He certainly would deserve a new contract. And, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he were to be offered one. The one thing is, though, that apart from at Wolves, Nuno doesn't tend to hang around long. I was looking at this before in his various jobs. He's generally only there, a year, 18 months, 2 years. So he's not really a manager who goes somewhere, builds a legacy. Wolves was the closest place he got to doing that, where he did 4 years. So on balance, I think the timing is significant. But yeah, let's just see how the next couple of weeks play out.
What do you think about it, Dan? There's the same question, I suppose, a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in our Forest WhatsApp chat with mates. We've all sort of had this running joke about like how Forest operate, and the ambition of the owner means that Nuno could feasibly be sacked in November if Forest are 9th in the Premier League, because Marinakis wants more and more and more, and he's not typically a guy who accepts second best, let alone 9th or 10th best. And the last 2 seasons have hurt him, and they've pricked his ego because he wants to be higher, and that's a credit to him. That's what all this is fueled by. He stood on the steps of the town hall and said we will be in Europe in a few years, and in a few years we are in Europe. So all power to him for that, and it's his club and it's his money. But if it was any other club, I'd say there can be no chance that that manager leaves at the end of the season unless he desperately wants to leave. With Forest, I'm not sure we can ever say that 100%. You know, we remember, you know, in previous owners, we remember Sean O'Driscoll getting sacked after winning at Leeds on Boxing Day. This is how things can go here, and I know every fan says that about their club, but with what Forest have not had for so long is effectively a quiet season. They've gone from low-end championship to promotion campaign to just staying up to Europe. And that makes it really hard to actually work out with any degree of fairness to everybody what the natural place is. And Evangelos Marinakis will see our natural place as at least one place higher than we are currently. That's always been his mindset at Olympiacos and at Forest. And I think it will have hurt him more than any supporter, or as much as any supporter, to go from 3rd to 7th between March and May. And I think that does create some doubt. I don't pretend to know what he's thinking at all, but it wouldn't completely surprise me if Nuno left in the summer. And there is an argument for Nuno that you build managerial careers by leaving places when your stock is the highest, because that enables you to make the sideways jump that is higher than it would have been before. And he took the Nottingham Forest job because his stock was at a point in time, and that stock is now far higher than it was 2 years ago, undoubted. And maybe he thinks a Roma is a natural step. Maybe he thinks that going back to Saudi and winning a league there is a natural step. I really hope not. I really hope he stays, and I hope, you know, we have a chance for a Forest manager to build something for more than 2.5 years, because we haven't had that for donkey's years, have we?
No. I think it's really interesting that from Dan. I completely agree. And one point I should have made is that this time last year, I was hearing quite a lot that Forest weren't absolutely sold on Nuno. I mean, there'd been kind of canvassing going on of the players about his training methods, about different things, which is never a good sign for a manager. Like, ultimately, he stayed on, and everybody's, you know, the Forest persuasion's delighted that he did because of what happened. And, you know, for much of the season, he's had an excellent relationship with Marinakis and the Marinakis family. But if the cards had fallen differently last summer, maybe if Marco Silva had been easier to get out of Fulham, you know, I don't think it was such a dead cert that Nuno was always going to stay. And that perhaps might play into their thinking this year, given it's exactly what Dan says. We can all talk about how, you know, we think it's been a brilliant season for Forest regardless. Marinakis will look and go, hang on a minute, 3rd all season, and now we've ended up 6th or 7th. Really? And yeah, I think the fact that they weren't always, you know, completely crazy about Nuno, it was initially a marriage of convenience, that could become more significant in the weeks to come.
The thing that really disappoints me as a supporter is that kind of chimes in your brain is that it's come out this week, right? It's not come out next week when the season's finished. It's come out on the week of a monumental fixture for Forest. Like, it isn't the biggest game we've played since coming up, because staying up is more important than getting in Europe financially, and some of it's out our hands. But this is an occasion that should be, whatever happens on Sunday, it should be an occasion in which supporters can thank this team, the staff, the manager, the owner for the journey that we've been on this season. And it's really sad that this has come out in this week, because I don't want anything to overshadow that, whatever happens. But we'll all be disappointed if we lose 3-0 to Chelsea on Sunday. But even if that happens, we're still in Europe, and that everybody there deserves to kind of enjoy that as a pure entity, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I agree. Silva's the name you always hear, isn't it? And Valverde as well. See, the Bilbao manager, I think he's a name that his connection with, because he was at Olympiacos, the family love as well. I do hope Nuno stays. We saw the value of a pre-season a year ago, and another one and another building block would be fantastic. We'll talk transfers as well, actually, because it leads nicely into that. Just for all that, a word of thanks for our second sponsor of Wednesday episodes, Vesta Blinds. I can't see behind Tom if he's got curtains or blinds. Dan's got a lovely skylight that would benefit from some blinds or shutters, I'm sure, via Vesta Blinds. Check out the link in the description if you're in the East Midlands or particularly the Notts area. Right, let's talk transfers. Allegiance into Gibbs White. Sort of updates that aren't updates again this week. Saying, Florian Wirtz isn't going to City. Eye emojis on Gibbs White, all that kind of stuff. How do you, crystal ball, Tom, how do you see this playing out?
I think it plays out as we all think it'll play out. I think, barring injury or some huge kind of turnaround, thinking Morgan Gibbs White will be a Manchester City player at the start of next season. How that happens is a different matter, but this has been bubbling along for a while. Forest, he's got 2 years left on his contract. Forest had been very keen to discuss a new one this season, but it takes two to tango in that situation, doesn't it? And those discussions have never really got off the ground. And look, let's not be so naive as to think that when a top club wants a player, that player is always aware of that interest. They don't have to break any rules to make sure that he is aware of the interest. I also think that Pep Guardiola likes to have these cozy little chats, doesn't he, with certain players after games, and that happened at Wembley with Gibbs White. I'm not sure that went down too well at Forest. And Nuno actually mentioned something in a press conference a couple of weeks ago about, it not being the done thing that a player should be aware of interest elsewhere at such a key time of the season. Now, I don't know how you stop that, and he knows that, but he chooses his words carefully, and he clearly wanted to get that out there. So yeah, I think Gibbs White will go. I think that the players now have pretty much accepted this. But what's important for Forest is that he has come back to form at the right time, because I think he had a pretty grey couple of months, didn't he? No goal or assist in 8 games. You mentioned it yourself, Matt. He was overshadowed by Eberechi Eze in that draw at Crystal Palace, so he did do very well at West Ham, and I think he's a much more not only mature player but a much more mature person now. I think Gibbs White than when he first joined Forest. I think he could be a tricky character, I think, sometimes off the field, but that's no longer the case anymore. I think people have talked to him about the importance of being professional and behaving like a sort of Harry Kane or Bukayo Saka all the time, not just on the pitch. I think that's really got through to him. So it would be fitting, I think, a fitting end to his spell at Forest if he could deliver something decisive against Chelsea, and it wouldn't surprise me if he did.
I agree that he'll go. I feel like cold hard money and potential trophies talks. Do you see any differently, Dan, that he might stay or not?
No, I can't. But I've made peace with it to the point that I'm quite proud of it. Like, he will remain one of my favourite ever Forest players in my lifetime, because of not just because the signing felt like a game changer in that the size of the fee was being discussed nationally as a big deal, which has not happened to Forest basically in my lifetime. And yet he made all of those doubters look foolish within months of joining. And I've been on this podcast numerous times before and said the sign of a strong club, a healthy club, is one that sells its players, best players, at its highest value when they aren't part of the financial elite, and then reinvest that money sensibly, and already has someone in mind to fill their boots, and the process starts again. And if we have signed Morgan Gibbs White for 25 million plus add-ons to near 40 million, and then we sell him for 60 million or plus, and we have got someone lined up, and we already have Elliot Anderson in there who's to ease that burden. This is how we always wanted. This was always my dream, and that dream is really hard in the moment for that dream to be saying, I'm glad we're selling one of my favorite ever players to watch in a Forest shirt, and it's probably my favorite player to watch over the last decade. But that's how it happens. Like, that's the reality of modern football. And it is annoying that a state-owned football club can kind of knock on the door and you have to go, yes sir, you can have this, how much are you willing to pay? But that is the reality. And Forest will react to that by going to other clubs and saying, we would like your best player, please, because we want to grow as well. There is a food chain there that is established, and Forest over time will try and erode that food chain and will try and move up some of the steps with success and with building the infrastructure. But it takes time, and until then, you have to make sensible decisions. And I just, as Tom says, I just hope at the end of the game, Morgan is able to fully appreciate just how much he's loved, because the age of a player signing and then staying forever, despite not playing in the Champions League, is over. And I think the moment that he wasn't in those last England squads initially and then didn't get on when he was, I think at that point I knew, and I think we all did. We thought, yeah, he's always said he loves Forest. He's always said he really wants to play at a World Cup. There's a World Cup in a year's time and he's not got in the England squad. I think that's more about who he plays for than how he plays. And I think he'll be straight in it if he starts pretty well at City. And he knows that. And, I kind of think all power to him. But I'm not, I'm glad that it happened, not sorry that it's over if it does.
I think credit needs to go to Steve Cooper as well for that, because we look back to that amazing summer after promotion. All those players signed, I think, ended up totaling 30 with the January window as well. And Cooper had fairly limited influence, let's be honest, over what happened. But Gibbs White was the one that he really wanted. He really was. I think it was even well enough known in FA circles how well they worked together from that under-17 World Cup that England won. And yeah, it was ridiculed at the time, but he's now become such a valuable asset. So I think well done to Steve Cooper on that one.
We've already seen a ton of links, and we'll talk about them more and explore them more if they become more concrete, because frankly, I don't know who a lot of these players are, but they sound exciting and young, which I like. You watch more European football, Tom. I'm not going to ask you to talk about individual players, but do you think that's the market that we could and should tap into, 23, 24-year-old players on the continent or South America?
I think it's everyone's dream in the era of PSR, unless you're the kind of revenue generating monsters that the clubs right at the top of the Champions League are. Then the way to stay within those limits is to sell and sell well. And the way to sell well is either sell your academy prospects, sell your academy players, but unless you've got a kind of Benfica type academy or Barcelona or Real Madrid or Ajax, there's a finite amount of players that you can move. And so the next one is to have a really, really smart recruitment operation. Brentford and Brighton are the best examples of that, but there's other examples all across Europe. So I think that is the way to go, because the beauty of it is that it leaves you quite a bit of margin for error. Because let's say that you buy 3 or 4 of these players at between the 10 to 20 million bracket. You only need one of them to really come off, and you've made your money back, and then you can reinvest it, and so on you go. The trick is just getting the right ones, and I think Forest are pretty well covered in terms of recruitment. Evangelos Marinakis has got really strong relations with a lot of the top agents, so they're going to know about some of the best prospects before a lot of other clubs do, because of those personal connections. And then you've got George Sirianos, who operates really effectively in Northern Europe. And then they have Pedro Ferreira, I think is the name of the scout for the South American area. So they're pretty well covered across a lot of key markets. And I'd expect them to find another couple of gems this summer for sure.
And that would tick all your boxes, Dan, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 things to consider here. Firstly, for European competition, the balance of the squad, the size of the squad is limited, particularly because Ryan Yates and Zach Abbott are only homegrown players at the moment. There is an incentive there, I suppose, to sign Carl Darlow or Jamal Lascelles or one of those that can kind of fill a position and feel like a bit of a cheat code to up those numbers. Maybe that's less of a concern in the Conference League, where the group, assuming we got through the group stage, there are some easier opponents in there and that you can kind of maybe rotate a bit more. But the other thing is that this is Edu's first summer, and so Marinakis will want that arrival to be front and centre of Forest business, and that means showing faith in Edu showing what he's good at, and Forest, as a result, landing signings that are in a slightly different bracket than they've been before. They have been brilliant at signing that 12 to 16, 17 million younger player bracket. I don't suspect the age profile of that will change, but it might be that the price changes. That might nudge up to sort of 20, 22 million level, because the reason they've got Edu in is because he is notorious. He has a reputation in the game that is higher than we've had before, and that's what Marinakis wants. So I think that's relevant as well. I think that'll up the budgets. The competition we're in pretty much depends on that budget, but I don't think it'll change. I think we just signed a number of 18 to 22 million pound players, or a couple more if we're in a higher competition. I don't think it'll change the profile that we look for.
Just, I'm conscious time's ticking, but two quick topics I want to ask you, and the second one is just like a name, but this one around it's following on from transfers, which will influence potentially the style of play next year. Do you think we need to change it? Because basically, at Nuno's style of play, you've got to be 100% to win games week in, week out. It's very hard, and it's very taxing mentally and physically, I think. And not that I'm against it, obviously. But do you think, Tom, it might have to change next season to take the burden off the players, if anything?
It's a really interesting one, that, Matt. I went to Duisburg in Germany 5 years ago during the Project Restart period. Empty stadium for the Europa League quarter-final between Sevilla and Wolves. And after that, Nuno talked about wanting to change the style of play, because Wolves of that era, all right, it's back three versus a back four, but the basic idea was similar to the Forest of this season. He talked about wanting to keep the ball more, score more goals, create more chances. And at the start of the following season, there was a shift in style. Unfortunately, what happened that season was that Raul Jimenez got that horrendous injury, which, could have done much worse than simply end his career. And we were in COVID times, which, without going into great detail about it, it really affected the way that Nuno and his team like to prepare their squad. They like to have all this togetherness, spending time together, meals together, individual chats. You couldn't do any of that in COVID. And so he ended up going back to what he knew, and he stuck to that since he's been in at Forest. I am pretty sure if he's still in place, he will try to evolve it for the reasons that you say. And he's shown that he can do it. In his first season at Valencia, they weren't purely this kind of defend and counter attack team. You will need, as Dan says, a deeper squad and some more kind of creative players in there. So it'll be fascinating to see how he does it. But I do think there will be an attempt to do it.
Yeah, because we have scored a lot of goals. I think we're either maybe 8th or 9th highest scorers. Obviously, putting 7 past Brian helps. So and I think we're an exciting team to watch. It's just a taxing team to play in, I imagine, Dan. So with a deeper squad, can you get away with it still or not?
Yeah, I wonder whether there is. I wonder whether buying a Forest have bought a lot of central midfielders over the last few years, but they've never quite nailed buying a number 6 as a real as a holding midfielder, someone to kind of shore it up. We've bought passing midfielders in that place. We've bought midfielders who we thought were that and have ended up being a bit more attacking. Ryan Yates is still the closest thing we've got to that. So I wonder if getting in I think they would have liked Ibrahim Sangare to be that kind of holding midfielder that can pass the ball as well. That's not quite happened yet. I wonder if they find that. I wonder if that enables them to be a bit more proactive and to push players forward in possession, knowing that we've got a defensive midfielder there to kind of mop up. I think we slightly have lacked that, and that kind of disallows the plan B to an extent. But the other thing is that if we are in the Conference League, which is the most likely eventuality, I suppose, just about, then they will be playing a number of weaker teams. And that should be an absolutely perfect training ground for Forest to play with the ball and try and break down teams, because that's the type of opponents they'll face. And the final thing to say is that Nuno spent an entire pre-season coming up with this plan A, and it has worked supremely well given our expectations at the start of the season. If he is there and he gets another full pre-season, they already know this plan, so there is the opportunity to work on something new there. If we go back to Spain, they can do all that again, and they can kind of work on that plan B, because there's no doubt, I think, that in the second half of the season, some opponents have slightly not worked us out, but they've known how Forest are going to play and they've reacted accordingly. And I'm thinking of Everton as the obvious example.
Mm-hmm. Much as I'd love to do another 20 minutes on Sangare, I don't think my brain can take it, having read the comments on Monday's show and all the stuff around him. But we'll talk about Sangare and team selection tomorrow in our match preview. Last question for each of the chaps. It's a really short one, not an easy one to answer, but because the time's ticking. Give me a name for your Forest player of the season, Tom Collomosse.
Matt Sells. I think he's made so many brilliant saves, generally been super commanding. And there's so many matches I can think of where he's made those kind of once in a lifetime saves, or saves that you associate with being once in a lifetime, kind of Banks from Pele type saves. And they've always been at crucial times. They've always been when Forest have been 1-0 up, or trying to hold on, like the Man United game, I think, was a particular one, but there've been others as well. So much as Chris Wood has been brilliant, I think Nico Williams deserves a mention as well, especially the second half of the season that he's had. I think it has to be Sells for me.
Same question, Dan.
It's between Milenkovic and Chris Wood for me, but I would give it to Chris Wood. I know we're founded upon the defence, but for the first time since Tom Collomosse, we've have a striker who has scored 20 goals in the top flight, and we went through League One seasons where strikers didn't get close to that. So it kind of blows my mind that the guy who's broken that duck is a 33-year-old who I remember bemoaning when we signed, and for the first 2 months he was there. 20 goals. I mean, it's just an extraordinary achievement. And yes, Milenkovic has been the game changer defensively. I get that. But just for that pure, he gets a chance, he scores a goal over the first half of the season, I think Wood was a revelation. So I'd give it to him.
It's interesting. There's so many names you could pick. I think it's, those three. I'd throw Murillo in the mix as well. I think, the career he's going to have and the moments that he can do stuff on the ball that almost no other centre-back in the league can do. Yeah. I think Dean Hyson's probably another example of that ball-playing centre-back, but I'd throw Murillo in the mix, certainly.
The whole point... Sorry, go on, Tom.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think they need an upgrade in that position because Willy Bolly physically isn't there anymore. And Morata, the gap between Murillo and Morata, blimey, that is a big gap, especially in a back four. I think Morata's probably all right in a 3, but in a 4, he doesn't look great, particularly in that game against Leicester. So I think unless he's going to change the strategy, all I'd say is that's a position they need. Assuming Murillo does stay, they need someone who's closer to Murillo in ability for when he does have to drop out.
So like the whole point of this is that we're talking about player of the season, and we've not mentioned the guy who's got the most assists in Anthony Elanga. We've not mentioned the second top scorer in Callum Hudson-Odoi. I think only 2 players in Europe have scored more goals from outside the box than him. We've not mentioned Elliot Anderson being a revelation central midfielder, and we've not mentioned the guy who we might sell for 65 million this summer. So like that's the point. Like this has been a team in every sense of it. We haven't mentioned Ola Aina, who is in the Premier League team of the season. It's like this is the good stuff. These are like these.
No, there's no one you can say, "Oh, if only he'd had a better season." Is there really?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we'd finished like 17th again and Nico Dominguez had the season he's had, he'd be a shoe-in probably. So yeah, it goes all the way down, certainly. It's been pretty crazy. Right, if you've enjoyed this, do us a favour, hit like, hit subscribe, do consider membership or Patreon. If you're a member, you'll get early access to this. And another interview I'm recording tomorrow, which should be a good one, so do check that out. Or just a lovely 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Dan, anything you want to plug? Any places people can find your work?
I said at the top of the show, the 92 finishes at Forest, so the piece will be out probably on Tuesday morning. It's going to be about related to what happens on Sunday, but more about kind of going around the country, and the one place you want to end up is home. So yeah, I'd love people to read that, and there'll be some kind of wrap-up content on the 92 project next week as well, which is all on the iPaper.
Lovely stuff. Is it a European tour next season then? I assume all around
It's
Europe.
Going to be. Yeah, well, no, we're going to do something kind of related, but not 92. But I will be at as many Forest European games as I can. It goes without saying. Yes.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. Tom, anything you want to plug for your work?
Yeah, Matt, it's quite timely, but I've just done a Q&A. We've had various questions on various platforms, which will be published on the Mail website now by the time this podcast goes out. So if you head to the Nottingham Forest page of the Daily Mail website, you'll find it there. It'd be great to get everyone to have a look at that and add their views too.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. Like I say, we're back tomorrow. Match preview, extra guest on Friday, probably, or Saturday. We've got an opposition preview with our regular Chelsea fan, and then a post-match show on Monday, and then summer review stuff should be interesting, and we'll be busy through the summer, of course, because we know what Forest are like. There's always something to talk about. Thanks very much to Dan. Thanks very much to Tom. Have a good day, everyone. And if we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.